John McClane. Dead Coach's Corner.
You're listening to the Rugby Coaches Corner podcast with your host, Andy Plymer.
For someone to explain.
Bringing you up-to-date coaching concepts from the world of rugby.
The distinction between these mandatory.
Sharing ideas to make the game better.
All right, welcome to episode number 17 of the Rugby Coaches Corner podcast. I'm your host, Andy Plymer, and joining me today is David Joyce. David is a sports physiotherapist as well as a certified strength coach. He has had roles lecturing on the Masters of Strength and Conditioning at Edith Cowan University, as well as the Masters of Sports Physiotherapy course at the University of Bath in the UK. Previously, he was a chief physiotherapist and performance specialist for the Chinese Olympic team, head of athletic development, athletic performance at the Western Force in Super Rugby, and is now the head of integrated high performance unit at the Greater Western Sydney Giants, which is an Aussie rules team in Australia. It's a pleasure to have you on the show, David, so welcome.
Thanks, Andy. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no worries. So, there's some pretty interesting stuff there. Chinese Olympic team, Western Force, now into Aussie rules. And obviously your academia side there. What's kind of been happening in the last decade that I've missed out there? A few books in there too.
Yeah, there's a couple of books in there. No, look, that's about it, mate. Look, it sounds really diverse, and I'm lucky enough to be the recipient of some fantastic adventures over the years, and I think a lot of that gets down to my willingness to follow my dream and to get into adventures and to have a girl that will indulge me with that. I've got no right to be with a girl, but so it's I'm lucky that I've got that spirit of adventure, but I've also had people that have allowed me to follow that dream over the past decade, and it's kind of got me where I am, which is essentially where I started in. So my mum and dad live in Canberra in Australia, and the footy club that I work for now is Canberra's team and based in Western Sydney. So after spending so much time overseas and all that sort of stuff, it's amazing how so many people come home to roost after all that time.
So what's your, like, a bit more detail on your role with the Greater Western Sydney Giants? They're a relatively new team.
Yeah, so this will be our fifth year in the competition. This will be my second season here.
Okay.
And I was recruited to head up the athletic performance unit, which is an integrated interdisciplinary team comprised of sports physiotherapists, rehab specialists, sports doctors, strength and conditioners, sports scientists, psychologists, nutrition, recovery, basically everything outside the football aspect.
Wow.
And I suppose it's our job to give training hours back to the coaches and really get our team as resilient and as physically powerful and dominant as we can. So we work. I've got a team of in excess of 20 people when you count all the part-timers as well, and we work to prepare our team each and every week and over the course of the pre-season, which we're in the last week of pre-season here, Andy, and it's been 20 weeks.
Wow.
It's a huge luxury for those people that have worked in Europe and the like, where you might get 6 weeks if you're lucky. So
yeah. Well, the guys will be jumping out of their skin, ready to go.
Oh, can't wait! Yeah, absolutely can't wait. So we've got a weekend off this week. We've had three of our practice games, and the real stuff starts next Saturday at the MCG. So
fantastic. Couldn't be a better venue for it to kick off too. That's great.
Yeah, we're fortunate to kick off at the home of the game. So
yeah, fantastic. Okay, well, so before there, you were with the Western Force for quite a bit of time. I think. What's a bit of a general kind of description of your roles that you had at the Western Force, and what were some of the highlights and challenges of working with probably the most isolated professional rugby team in the world, I'd say?
Yeah, we were the world's most travelled professional sports team of
Wow,
anywhere in the world.
that's
Yeah,
incredible, eh?
because our closest away game was a 4-hour flight away, and several times we would be travelling further to our home game than our opposition were.
Oh
So
my goodness, eh?
yeah, for those of you listeners that don't really know the geography of Perth, Perth is based in the west of Australia, and it's closer to the capital of Indonesia than it is to the capital of Australia. Um, it's a long bloody way from anywhere,
Yeah.
and the Super Rugby competition when I was doing it was comprised of 5 teams from South Africa, 5 teams from Australia, 5 teams from New Zealand, and of course that's now expanded to 6 teams from South Africa, 5 from New Zealand, 5 from Australia, 1 from Japan, and 1 from Argentina. So it's even bigger than what it was when I was there, and I was there for 2.5 years, and in that time we had some really good success. No, we didn't win the competition, but
Yeah.
when you consider we've got the smallest nursery of any team in the entire competition because it's not a rugby heartland team. Rugby is in Australia traditionally the East Coast and specifically in New South Wales and Queensland. So we don't have a huge nursery there, but we have some rusted on fans and we've got a terrific stadium there and all that sort of stuff. So it was a really good, memorable couple of years that I spent at the Force, and my role there was very similar to what I've got here. I was head of athletic performance, and I worked with S&C, sports science, physio, all that sort of stuff. It's just that the sport of rugby in Australia is, I would say, not even a third as big as what Australian rules is. So I've just got more staff, more resources, and some would say more headaches here. But the advantage of these resources is that you're not spread too thin. So I'm actually able to step back and take much more of a leadership role here and not be 100% operational like I was at the Force, where I had to be, the lead physio and, do a lot of the strength work and a lot of the strategy work and a lot of the corporate work and do all these other things. Whereas now I don't have to be strapping every ankle that comes in and teaching squat technique to every first year player and all those sorts of things. So I've got a much bigger staff that we're able to utilise here.
Yeah, so that's obviously a big challenge there that you mentioned with the Force, that you'll kind of being all things for all people, and that's got to wear like the talent thin in terms of the staff there. What other challenges did you have, like especially with the long travel and things like that? How'd you cater for that? What were some of the strategies you put in place for that?
Well, what we found was that and I found it myself. You look forward to it in the first instance. We're at the start of the year when you're fresh, that sort of stuff. But then you might have a 6-day turnaround into New Zealand, which is a really tough place to go and win anyway.
Yeah.
Let alone when you've just come back from Africa. You're 2/3 of the way through the season. You've got a 6-day turnaround into a place which is east of where you are, which is harder to travel to than it is when you're travelling west. And you're dealing with a 5-hour time zone difference, plus having a huge flight to get there, and so that there's the whole thing's rigged against you in a way. And yet you've got to do that. You've got to perform on the weekend, and you've also got to get some decent training load in so that you're not getting weaker or slower or less fit throughout the week. So there's enormous challenges, not just from an energy perspective, but from a player health and I would say a staff health perspective as well. So it's an incredibly difficult environment to work in, but that is part of its attraction as well. You learn a lot about the best way to travel and the best way to train when you're fatigued and those sorts of things. Is it ideal? Absolutely not. But do you learn a lot? Absolutely you do.
Yeah, that's great. It must have been pretty brutal at times, and I'm sure you got some great lessons out of that.
I reckon what ends up by happening is that you get by to start with, but then towards the end of the year, when you actually should be wanting to be at your freshest, because hopefully you're moving into finals, you're actually decaying. There's just the accumulation of travel and all those sorts of things. You almost feel like you get disproportionately jet lagged towards the end of the season, beginning.
Yeah, that's difficult. All right, one of the things I wanted to talk about was the couple of books that you've put out. The earlier book that you put out was titled High Performance Training for Sports. I've got that book. I go back to that book all the time. I think it's amazing. What was your experiences writing that book, and what do you think some of the big lessons that coaches can get out of it from reading that book?
It's really nice to hear nice words about it, Andy. Thanks for that. It's actually a book that I constantly refer to. It's on my desk here at work, and it's the most dog-eared book that I own, because I'm consistently referring to it, because what we did was we tried to recruit the very best people in the world to write about their areas of expertise, rather than one person writing about 25 different topics. We got 25 different people writing about their particular area of interest and expertise. So, we'll have, we think, well, who's one of the best guys in the world to talk about running technique? Franz Bosch. Okay, let's get him to write a chapter. And Sophia Nymphius writes about her pet topic, which is agility and change of direction. And then, we'll get some wizards about monitoring to write about their stuff, Stu Cormack and Aaron Coote. So there's enough stuff in there so you can immediately apply it for any coach out there, and it's written in a way that it is immediately applicable, but there's sufficient depth in there that it continually rewards repeat reading, and that's why I continually go back to it, even though I've been in this game for 20 years. There's always stuff that you get out of it, and it's always good to have that refresher as well. So, look, people seem to really like it, which is fantastic for us. Not in a fiscal sense, because we don't make any money out of it. But
Does.
no, they absolutely certainly don't. But it was great for Dan and myself, because we got really good at editing copy and writing stuff of ourselves, and got really good in terms of establishing and nurturing our network and relationships. And we got incredibly, particularly for me, or certainly for me, it honed my understanding of what's really important in terms of athletic performance and athletic development, because you're reading these things so many times. Each chapter you're reading 15, 20 times, and it enables you to really crystallise your thoughts about what's important in what you're trying to do. So it's something that I'm really proud of, and when I'm long gone, it's still going to be in the library if libraries still exist when I'm long gone.
Yeah, that's great, and I think that was the highlight for me, was the readability of it, and yeah, exactly. I go back to it every few weeks to plan and to think about things, and then you forget these concepts because it's not your specialty, a lot of these areas, so you need to have that reference to go back to.
Yeah, and we felt that was important. There's a lot of books out there that are written by academics, and whilst this is all scientifically sound, of course, we wanted it to be a masterclass, and we wanted it to be so someone comes in and if they came into your organisation and you asked them about jumping and landing, so we get Jeremy Shepherd and we go, right, well, what would you teach us about jumping and landing? And you don't necessarily want a lit review. You actually want principles that you can apply immediately. And that's what we wanted to get in this. And I'm confident in myself that that's what we've delivered, and hearing experienced coaches like yourself, Andy, say those sorts of things as well. That's reward and recompense for us.
Cool. So with that in mind, what's your image of a high performance environment? How do you create a high performance environment?
Well, yeah, I think you've got to start at the top in terms of a high performance environment. It's a term that's splashed around everywhere from courses to Twitter, really, and what's high performance for me might be slightly different to what it is for you, but fundamentally high performance, whether it's in sport or healthcare or architecture, it should be defined by the culture that the organisation lives and breathes.
Yeah.
And for me, that is, having a singular vision that is clearly articulated, and you've got a group of people that are empowered to work towards that vision. And that, as I say, that goes across any type of organisation across sectors. We can talk about whether you Olympic lift or whether you do machine lifting or whatever, and really that's kind of immaterial. That's certainly really granular, but that is not going to distinguish between a high performance environment and a low performance environment. The things that high performance environments have got are real clarity of vision, accountability, empowerment of staff, and which is all underpinned by a framework of communication. So they're the things that you need to get right. And there's no point in me having a high-performance APU or athletic performance unit that we've got here at the Giants if the coaching team don't buy into what we do. So actually it needs to be an organisation-wide thing. And there's no point in... So at the Giants here, we've got a football department of which the APU is part of. Then we've got fan development, and then we'll have marketing, and then we'll have media, and then we'll have corporate and all those sorts of things. And there's no point football being high performance if we're continually let down by our media team. There's no point our media team being high performance if our football department continually let them down by not turning up to events or those sorts of things. So really, a high-performance environment is something which is characterised by an entire organisation, not just a subsection, because one individual doesn't make a difference. It's a broad strategy that must permeate the entire building.
Yeah, I don't know if you caught it, but there was a really interesting blog post from Faction Elite by Terry Condon about high-performance groups, and that a lot of high-performance cultures lead to low success because they're too focused on the outcome rather than the processes that you've just talked about.
Yeah, I did read that, and Tez writes some really, really insightful stuff about this sort of stuff. He's incredibly knowledgeable in this area, and I always enjoy reading what he writes. But he's absolutely right. So fish rots from the head. And unless you get that side of things right, and a leader that has got a really strong vision and empowers people to work towards that, it crumbles. It really does crumble. There's no point just having this amazing series of worker ants and interns and the like if they don't get empowered and rewarded for their work, and they don't continually get nourished so that they want to lift everyone around them, because you're only as strong as your weakest link, and you absolutely need the senior management team, the leaders, to be leading this. So unless they're on the same page, you've got no chance of having a high performance organisation.
That's interesting. And another concept that's going around, I don't know if you've read any of James Smith's ideas around. He's a strength coach in the US, and he's saying like the current hierarchy of high performance teams, we've kind of got it all wrong. That we've got the head coach of an organisation who calls all the shots, but actually, is that the most qualified person to be doing that, or does it need to be a collective of people rather than one kind of person who's going to pull the trigger or not pull the trigger?
Yeah, I'm not specifically familiar with James's work, but what I would say is that's he's not the only one to share that view. Traditionally, the head coach is the one that gets tasked with that responsibility because they are the senior face of an organisation, usually, in many cases, and it's their balls that are on the line if an organisation fails in a lot of instances. But you're right, there's a lot of head coaches out there that are fantastic head coaches because they're fantastic head coaches, not because they are organisational change agents. I think the way it runs in Australian rules is quite different to the way it runs in rugby. The rugby is very much head coach dominated, but in Australian rules, whilst the head coach calls a lot of shots, they generally have enough humility to stand back and let people in my position call shots on certain aspects as well. And the head coach and myself are overseen by a general manager of football, and that general manager of football is overseen by the CEO of the organisation and the board. But the reality is a high-performance team needs to have a team of teams, and there's a terrific book by General Stanley McChrystal which goes into that in terms of the military hierarchy, and it can't be a top-down approach. It has to be people working together towards a shared vision that have all got responsibility for making decisions that increase the effectiveness of decision making in a complex environment. So, your description of what James would say is it pretty much echoes what I would think.
Yeah. Okay, that's interesting. I'll have to look up that book too. Okay, in all your spare time, then you decided to write a second book, or co-author a second book. I don't know if it was it co-authored, the Sports Injury Prevention and Rehab.
Yeah, it's pretty similar format to High Performance. So Dan and I were co-editors and wrote a lot of the chapters and the like. The funny thing about it was it actually was the first book, and what basically happened was we were looking for publishers for it, and we got down to a choice of two. We chose one, and the other one said, "Oh, listen, we'd really like you to write a book for us." So foolishly, we agreed to two books at the same time, which is, agreeing to one book at a time is foolish. Agreeing to two at the same time is downright stupid. And but the second book came out first. So Sports Injury Prevention and Rehab is what Dan and I would call book one, but it was the one that was released second. And it's very similar. We've tried to provide performance-based rehab solutions for injuries and injury prevention. So we're not trying to talk about this is how you treat a grade 2 medial collateral ligament sprain, but it's more this is what you need to do to get a knee back to the job that a knee needs to be able to perform. So a lot of sports injury books will go back and say, oh, well, once the injury's healed, you need to do 3 sets of 8 bodyweight squats and, nonsense like that is not high performance. And a lot of performance or sports science or strength and conditioning texts really don't understand pathology. So what we've tried to do is bridge that gap whereby we talk about injuries, but we actually get them back to performance rather than just being pain-free.
Yeah, and I think that's probably for the generalist rugby coach, that's probably an area where most people wouldn't feel competent in is things like injury prevention and things like recovery, and often they'll defer it, or they'll just say a throwaway statement like you've got to be prepared for the season or you've got to recover well. What's some of your thoughts on that?
Well, what we've tried to do with the book is write it in such a way that it is applicable to coaches and to athletes alike. There's enough depth in there that it will challenge some very well-read students of sports science and physiotherapy and those sorts of things. But we've tried to make it as applicable to everyone as possible. So a rugby coach should be able to pick it up and go, right, well, these are the fundamentals that I can see that I need to follow in terms of recovery, or even if it just allows them to have an informed conversation with their physio or their doctor or whatever when it comes to shoulder injuries or running technique, even if it just allows them to read up on the topic and go, right, well, I've got a better idea. I'm not an expert, but I've got a better idea than what I was when I started the chapter. So that's kind of the spirit behind it, if you like. In terms of your question regarding injury prevention, I don't think there's loads of injury prevention sort of templates out there, but none of them are particularly effective if they're not strategic and targeted towards the injuries that are most likely to occur. So you kind of need to do a bit of reconnaissance to work out, well, what is it that we're actually really trying to prevent? In the same way that you wouldn't do a lot of flood prevention work in the Sahara Desert because that's clearly not going to be the biggest risk there.
Yeah.
Do rowers need to spend a lot of time doing ankle injury prevention work? But probably not. In a sport like rugby where you can pretty much get anything, it becomes a little bit more difficult. So you need to drill it down by position. So we know that props don't tend to get hamstring injuries because they don't run fast enough, but they certainly do get calf injuries.
Yeah, scrummaging, absolutely.
Absolutely. So your props are much better off spending their precious time, resources, and let's face it, we're all trying to bargain for athletes' time. They're better off getting most bang for their buck by looking at the injuries that they're most likely to get, which in a prop is going to be a calf, a low back, and a shoulder and neck. So they're the critical things. Whereas low back issues don't tend to be as big a complaint for anyone that plays in the back three, but they get your hammies, they get your hips and groins because of their kicking load. So they need to do more work in that area. So there's no sort of one size fits all thing for an injury prevention. If you're running a circuit which tries to be all things to all people, you're likely to be doing a bit of a service to a few people rather than a really good service to all the people.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and it just goes to show how complex the game of rugby is, how many little facets there are that we need to consider as coaches and people involved in.
Yeah.
One of the things I heard you talking about, I'm not sure what podcast it was. It might have been Ron McKeefery's podcast, but you talked about at the Force you developed a recovery system with the guys based on points, and they had to accumulate X amount of points in a 24-hour period past the game or a 48 period past the game. I really like that idea. What were the details on that?
Oh, we're just trying to make things a little bit easily digestible for the athletes, and I'm a big believer in that recovery needs to be holistic and encompassing all the stresses that an individual will face. And it's not just the bumps and bruises for the game, but it's also the stress that they go under in terms of their performance, and it's their financial stress or injury stress, all these other things. So physical stress is just one part of the overall picture. Mm-hmm. So recovery therefore needs to be holistic, and there's a bit of literature out there now which says what an athlete is likely to choose in terms of their recovery is likely to be the things that's most effective for them. So what we had a couple of non-negotiables, and that was the sleep, and we wanted 8 hours sleep, and we wanted a good meal, because we know that sleep and nourishment are the two cornerstones of any sort of recovery. We want people back to pre-match weight within 24 to 36 hours of the game.
Yep.
And then we had basically a menu of things that they can choose from. So here at the Giants, we say there's 35 points for your appropriate meal post-match. There's 35 points for 8 hours sleep. So there's your 70 points. An ice bath will be worth 10. There's 80 points. And then you've got a raft of other things that you can choose. It might be a 20-minute cool down on a bike, or it might be a massage, or it might be some flexibility work, and all these things are worth 10 points, and they're actually free to choose what they want. Now, some people hate massage. I'm one of them. I don't like being massaged for some strange reason. So all that would do for me is increase my stress levels and my cortisol levels if that was enforced upon me. So that's actually counter productive to what we're trying to do. So I don't enforce that. Whereas some people absolutely love it, and it's a great way for them to stress, to chill out, and so they'll choose that. And that's basically how we build up our 100 points.
Yeah, I think that's like people, especially if you're in like a club rugby kind of setup, which, let's be honest, that's where most rugby coaches are. They're in the amateur setting. I think that's a really applicable and easy way to get at least guys doing something rather than nothing at all, and to get them thinking about it and talking about it, is to give them that menu and a whole bunch of options with some structure surrounding it.
Yeah, and if you you give an athlete a bit of choice in how they manage their own body, it's likely to buy into it than if you just mandate certain things. There's a role for mandating certain things, but not for everything.
Yeah. Okay. Well, then probably the last thing on your second book, what's some of the things a coach needs to be, a rugby coach especially, needs to be considering when an athlete's returning from injury? What's some of the priorities they've got? Like, that's a pretty general question considering what we talked about before and the range of injuries. But what would you say are some of the priorities that they need to take into account?
The three main ones are whether they're safe to return, so whether the tissue itself is healed.
Mm-hmm.
The second thing is whether they've returned to performance, so that's a functional test. So it might be getting back there, their ability to tackle, their ability to step, their ability, say if you're a hooker, for them to be able to throw in a line out, all these sorts of things. And the final thing is whether the athlete themselves feel that they're ready to go back to playing. So that's arguably the most critical thing. And if there's no's to any of that, they're not ready. So if the tissue itself hasn't healed, that's an immediate strike. They're out. If the tissue is healed, and you're confident with that, then you go to question 2: is can they do their job? Can they sidestep at speed? Can they tackle? Can they be tackled? Can they engage in a scrum? All these sorts of things back to their pre-injury level. Fantastic, tick. Okay, if it's a no, then it's a strike. If it's a yes, then go to the final question, which is speaking to the player themselves. Listen, are you confident to do this? Are you happy to do this? Have you got enough training load under you to return to training? So, and that's a really important thing too. So if someone's been out for 5 weeks with an with an ankle injury, have they accumulated enough training load so that they're not at a risk of popping a hamstring? So they actually need to prove that they've done enough work for their body to be resilient, not just at the site of injury, but for their other structures that have had to be deloaded whilst they're waiting for the first injury to heal.
Yeah, and obviously that's going to create a bit of a team effort there too, with the coach and the assistant coaches and the athletic therapist or physiotherapist and the player themselves.
Yeah.
All right, great. Well, those 2 books, I haven't got the second one yet, but I'm definitely going to get it. I'll put those up on the website so that listeners can have a look at it and access it and find out where they can pick it up. And mine's an ebook, so I find it really, really handy as well. It's just on the iPad. Is the second one an ebook as well? The sports injury?
They're both physical books and virtual books. So whatever version that you like. I think the ebook's good because you can actually take it onto the gym floor and it's a bit easier on flights and stuff. But I'm a bit of a traditionalist. I like having the actual hard copy. So both versions are available.
All right, we always end the show with the same 4 closing questions. As a kid growing up, who was your favourite athlete that you liked watching compete?
Look, so I grew up in a small country town in Victoria in Australia where I'd never actually heard the word rugby until I was about 13. So a lot of my heroes, yeah, that's right. A lot of my heroes were Australian rules footballers, which I suppose a lot of your listeners may not necessarily know. But I would say that when I started getting into rugby, I absolutely loved the way John Eales played the game. So he was a second rower for the Wallabies and for Queensland. And the thing that I loved about him was that he was so tough, and he was so tall, and yet he was a goal kicker, and he was
fantastic.
Yeah, his nickname was Nobody because nobody's perfect.
Yeah.
And I once sat behind him at a movie in Brisbane, and pretty much he's so big that I never saw any of the movie. So yeah, look, he was a bit of a hero of mine. But in terms of who my favourite player now would be, look, I love watching Ben McCalman play because I know him as a person. He's a very good person, and I really admire like grit in players, and he typifies that for me. But actually, the one person that I really love watching is Michael Hooper, who's the flanker for the Wallabies and the Waratahs. He's extraordinarily quick off the mark. He's tough over the ball. He's as hard as nails. He's a really good leader. He's only 24, 25 years old. He's someone that I love watching play.
Yeah, and I think tie that in there with David Pocock and having someone like McCalman coming off the bench. The Australian back row is looking pretty formidable right now.
Yeah, and I think that the theme between all three of those is they're all back rowers, and they're the ones that go in and under. They're trying to peel for ball. They're the ones that won't always get the accolades, but once you get a back row working well, your team is incredibly difficult to beat.
Yeah, and I like that you brought up Ben McCallum because I thought not the World Cup just gone, but the previous one, he got played out of position a bit, and I thought that was he got unfairly judged because of that. But he's come into a real purple patch right now, and I just think he's an excellent player.
Yeah, no, he definitely is. He's a very good person as well.
Yeah, fantastic. All right, beauty. So that was my second question, favourite current players. Now, what about a high-profile coach that you like what they're doing and respect what they're doing?
Look, in terms of high profile, I might take you back to my days working in the Premier League, and he's a name that a lot of people know if they follow soccer or follow the Premier League. But he was the manager when I was at Blackburn Rovers, a guy called Sam Allardyce, and I really respect Sam because he was the one that recruited me from into soccer, and I really respect him for a couple of reasons. One is that on my first day, he asked me what my job was, and I said, I'm here to physio and strength coach and all that sort of stuff. And he said, no, your job is to make the dreams of young men come true. And so he took me out of being granular to sort of step back and go, right, well, this is actually why we're all here, is to make the dreams of young men come true. And I think that's a really important point. And the other thing that I really liked about him too was that he had a reputation of being at the forefront of sports science, and that was how he got portrayed in the media and all that sort of stuff. And he actually wasn't. But what he was someone that allowed people, he saw the value in it, and he allowed people to do their job. And that was a really important lesson for me, was that you've got to recruit people that know what they're doing, and then the job of a leader or a manager is to remove all the obstacles that are in their way so that they can actually do their job properly. Yeah. A lot of managers and leaders are micromanagers and control freaks, and in actual fact they end up by being the roadblock. He was the opposite of that.
Yeah, that's a great story. That's really cool. All right, and then last question: who's maybe a grassroots coach that deserves a mention?
I suppose like that answer for me is quite clouded, because I've spent the last 20 years in elite sport, and I don't actually have an awful lot to do with grassroots sport, and that's more of an indictment of me more than anything. It's just that's the reality of my world, which is a really small bubble. But I would say someone is not grassroots. He's still elite, but it wouldn't get all the accolades. He's not high profile. Is the defence coach at Western Force, a guy called Dave Vessels, who is a South African bloke who the one thing you know about the Force is that they won't tend to score a lot of points against you, but geez, they don't leak much. And it's because of Dave's system whereby he analyses, meticulous analyst of the opposition, but he's got his defensive system that he believes in. He's stuck to. He's taught people. I've seen the way he can coach, and he's taught the Western Force their line when they were on was virtually impregnable, and all of that from a guy that is probably 5 stone ringing wet. Never played the game at an elite level, but was just a master strategist and understood the game so well. And there's a lot of respect from there, because a lot of coaches try to get to where tried to become an elite coach because they're a really good player, and that doesn't always work. Whereas he's become an exceptional coach because he's an exceptional coach, not because he was an exceptional player.
I really like that message there, and because most coaches out there didn't play national rugby, but they love what they do and work really hard at it. So that's great. I'll have to look him up for sure.
Yeah, no, really, really worthwhile looking up.
Perfect. All right. Well, thanks very much, David. I know you're like a really busy man, especially with the Aussie rules season just about to kick off. So really appreciate you finding some time to come on the show and chat about your books and your time in rugby. So thanks a lot for coming on and having a talk.
It's a great pleasure, Andy. Thanks for having me.
No worries. Talk to you soon.
Cheers. Bye.
Cheers, mate. Bye. Well, thanks for listening, everyone, to episode number 17 of the Rugby Coaches Corner podcast. That was a really enjoyable one for me. I've been trying to arrange that meeting with David Joyce for quite some time now. He's an extremely busy man, and really grateful that he could come on, and I hope he got a lot out of it. I just wanted to let you know, coming up in the next few episodes, we're going to have Tyler Leggett on, and he's going to discuss creating a private academy and how that works and his experiences in that. Then we're also going to have Jocelyn Barrio come on. She's going to discuss coaching girls sevens, especially focusing on the under 18 age group. We'll then future guests to be confirmed, but hopefully we're going to have some people come on for some sevens conditioning work, and also another episode on attack, especially focused on sources of possession and try scoring trends in rugby today. So thanks again for joining us. If you like what you're hearing, give us a rating on iTunes, and we'll catch you in the next episode. Cheers.
Thanks for listening to the Rugby Coaches Corner podcast. If you enjoyed the show, please leave a review via iTunes and keep listening for the next episode. You can also follow us on Twitter at RugbyCoachSCNR or via the website at therugbycoachescorner.com. Until next time, keep sharing ideas to make the game better.